Well, the new year is just around the corner. Let's talk about personal finances and personal debt. But first, our special guest, the Governor of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Tom Wolf. Back after these words.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, Governor, thanks for coming on. In deference to you, I know you wear a mask, so I have a mask on, and the staff people have a mask. That's quite all right. We understand why you wear it.
I have my vaccines, including the booster, but I still think wearing a mask is helpful.
Me too. All right, let's go to a very important topic. Every day we read about what's going on in hospitals with COVID-19, and you've asked the Federal Emergency Management Agency, some more often than not just simply called FEMA, for their assistance. What have you asked them, and why is it important?
Well, let me start with the reason for the ask. The hospitals are having some stress right now, especially in the central part of the state. They usually run at a pretty high capacity, somewhere around 75 to 80% of capacity. They're now over that, and it's interesting. Part of it is COVID. On average, about 17% of the cases are COVID cases. So it's a small minority of cases, but there's a lot of pent-up demand that has happened because of the pandemic. So you could also attribute that to COVID. People waited to get elective surgery, and some of the things they waited for, maybe they're more acute now. So hospitals are struggling. It's not as much a problem of beds as it is a problem of people. And so what hospitals, like everybody else in the economy, having an issue of attracting employees.
What I've heard, Governor, is that there are people who are, assigned to have surgery. That's being put off and delayed. I don't think it's sort of emergency, but is that that's a staffing problem that you're talking about?
That's part of it, but again, that was done. Elective surgeries in general were put off during especially in the early going in the pandemic, right. And so a lot of the people who put that off are sicker now than they were because they didn't get the elective surgery. So those people are coming to the hospital. But it's not a matter of the space or the beds as much as it's a matter of the people. So what I did was write to FEMA and say, let's see, are there some things that we know you have strike teams, and I think that's out of actually Health and Human Services. But we directed it to FEMA to say, let's see what we can all do to address the needs of hospitals.
Well, on another important topic, I'll tell you, every day you pick up a newspaper or watch TV or on radio, and what do you hear? You hear about gun violence, and I mean, it's obviously in the cities more than in the rural and small town parts of Pennsylvania. And you have an executive order to combat gun violence. So what's the order about?
Well, there are a couple things. There are four things that I think we just sort of common sense gun safety, lost and stolen guns, the red flag. If you're somebody who poses a threat to somebody, maybe we shouldn't allow you to have a gun. I mean, I think these are all common sense things that we ought to do to make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep gun violence at a minimum. I'm also, through the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, have gotten now $30 million to go out to community organizations to say, organizations on the ground in communities, what should we do? What can we do to address this scourge of gun violence that we're seeing all across the Commonwealth?
Yeah, and it seems it's also a community effort. I mean, it just can't be done alone. But I mean, it's scary when 10, 15 people walk into a store, walk into a shop and raid it and pull stuff out. That's really scary. And that's something we've not seen in the past.
Yeah, I think you're talking about some of the stolen stuff that hasn't involved gun violence, but gun violence is a specific thing. Crime in general is actually down. Gun violence is up.
It's up. Yeah. All right, well, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about redistricting. We have 19 congressional seats, 9 Democrats, 9 Republicans hold those seats, and we're going to lose a seat. And the fact of the matter is that the congressional boundary lines have to be redrawn, and that's always a bit of controversy. We'll get to that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, the host misspoke. I said we have 19 congressional districts. We actually have 18. We're going to lose one. We'll go to 17. All right, Governor, I want to talk about something else, redistricting. I mean, it's a hugely important topic. You know, the Supreme Court has weighed in 2018, declared the 2011 map unconstitutional. And here we go again. So what's your sense about redistricting?
Well, again, the governor's role in redistricting is very limited. I only have a role in the congressional map. And my role is very limited there. The General Assembly sends me a map, and I either sign it or I veto it, and then the Supreme Court decides. I'm going to make my decision based on, I've created an advisory group, right. And they are advising me on fair maps. They have gone around and done taken testimony all across the state in person 8 times, once virtually, and I have a website where people can just talk to me directly about what kind of map they want. When the General Assembly sends me their map, I'm going to judge it against the guide, and we've come up with sort of guidelines. It has to be past constitutional muster, the Voting Rights Act, the Constitution. It has to have a fair and open process, and I think the outcomes have to be fair. I mean, if the outcomes based on past performance ends up where we have maybe 13 and 4 seats, that's not going to be real good. Right. So I think we want a fair map, and I'm going to look at what I'm given and judge it against what the people of Pennsylvania have told me they want, right. And then say yes or no.
Given past controversies over it, and there have been, there are folks who think that they won't get it done on time, to do the filing for the primaries, and that they might have to be pushed back. I don't know. I mean, you're a little more optimistic, aren't you?
Well, on my part, I think that the congressional maps will be done on time. The General Assembly has already taken testimony, and they've done, and I applaud them for this, a transparent process. They've actually even shown a map, and a map that has been modified. I mean, I have some concerns about that map, but I think they're going through the process as it should be going through, and I think I expect that it'll be done on time.
All right, well, let's talk about voting rights legislation. Democratic governors, you all have pushed the Senate to go into action. I mean, look at the big debate we had over voting and mail-in voting, and former President Trump is widespread corruption. He's been saying that. What did the Democratic governors want to achieve?
I think they wanted to achieve essentially what we've achieved here in Pennsylvania with the Republican Act 77.
Yeah.
I think there's some things we can do to improve it, and I think there's agreement on a number of things. What I think Act 77 did here is to expand access, make access to the polls easier.
And that was bipartisan.
It was bipartisan. Actually, it was a Republican bill, and I applauded that. In fact, I sat with the Speaker of the House when I signed it in the reception room. And I think what when you said the Senate, it's the U.S. Senate. What they're grappling with right now is basically to create those same protections, not just in a place like Pennsylvania, but all across the country.
But the 2 big concerns that were mentioned was whether you had to show a valid ID. You'd have to do the first time you vote, and matching signatures. They were, if I understand, when there were amendments to it, they were the two that you were cited as concerning you the most. Is that correct?
The idea is that in American history, when we've had, and you know this, is when we've given specific people a lot of authority to be arbitrary, like that signature matches or no, it doesn't. It has led to some gamesmanship that has kept people from legitimately voting, and I think that's what we want to guard against. And so you're right. Right now, when you go to vote for the first time, you have to show an ID.
On the signature.
But you don't want that to be something that basically we use as a pretext for keeping people from voting.
Well, imagine this: 40 years ago, you signed to register. 40 years later, is your signature even close to what it was for? I joke about that, but there's a certain seriousness about it, I think.
Well, it's a really good point. Yeah, I'm 73, so
yeah.
I actually go back more than 40 years.
All right, before I let you go, the minimum wage has been a huge topic, not just in Pennsylvania and throughout the nation as a whole. Minimum wage in Pennsylvania, what's the rate now?
$7.25. It's the lowest in our neighborhood. West Virginia's is higher. Ohio, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, to get all our neighbors, they're all higher than Pennsylvania. And it's, the argument is that, well, the market is determining what the wages are, and they're well above $7.25.
Yeah.
That's true in most cases, but it's not true in every case. And
your goal is $15?
Yeah. And hey, Florida voters, at the same time they voted for Donald Trump in the last election, they voted to have a $15 minimum wage.
Yeah.
So
I thought there'd be a gradual increase, maybe go to 10 or 12. I thought that might be
mine was to
workable.
start at 12, but have a pathway to 15, and do it on a regular basis, and then tie it to inflation after that, so we don't have to keep coming back to this.
Okay. Governor, I want to thank you for coming on. We'll have you on next year. We'll talk about your years of service as governor of the Commonwealth. All right, we're going to talk about personal finances and personal debt. We'll get to that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by CrossState Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Well, personal finances and personal debt, as we start the new year, they're important subjects. Joining me to talk about it is Mike Wishnow. He's a Senior Vice President at CrossState Credit Union Association. And Nicola Foggie, she is Chief Regulatory Officer of CrossState Credit Union Association. They're long names, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah, but we'll get them. All right, Michael, let's start with this. What should people do in order to protect their personal finances? You know, they have to protect them as well as make money, and both of those elements are important. Go through the steps.
Well, sure. I mean, our first recommendation is to have a written budget. Frankly, Terry, in this country, half of the people are living paycheck to paycheck with no reserve. No short-term reserve. They'd have a hard time if their car broke down, they had to pay $500. Mm-hmm. They'd have to either go borrow it or what have you. Of course, we encourage people to save, pay themselves first, and that way, as part of their budget, they'll have a little bit of money for an emergency situation. Sure. Is that fair?
Yep, that's fair. That sounds right.
All right, another aspect of this is to take a really critical approach when you get to personal debt, and that means stepping back from, you know, personally what you would like to buy, where you would like to travel. And that's not easy to do, is it?
It's really not easy to do. Over 40% of Americans live beyond their means. That's number one. But they should take a critical look at their personal debt. I mean, a hard look. And so 66% of Americans do not pay off their credit card debt each month. And especially around the holidays, it's easy to get further in debt. because you want to do for your loved ones, you know, buy those nice gifts.
Yeah, and I think it's March. You know, not paying them off till March. That's a good distance away. Go ahead.
That's 90 days away, and in 90 days you can incur other debt. So some things that you should do is, if you have debt, literally sit down and write a plan, or get on your computer and type up a plan to pay it down. You should take those highest rate debt cards, credit cards or loans, and try to pay them down first. And if not, if you have high cost debt, consider refinancing to a lower interest rate. And certainly your credit union is a great place, or your other financial institutions is a great place to discuss this plan with someone from there, so you can get on the right track.
And the good news, Terry, is that with all the government stimulus money that came over the past year and a half, debt levels have actually gone down for the first time that I can remember. So people are, in fact, cognizant of that debt.
They're walking away from jobs, which is
that's a whole other issue.
Yeah, I know, but it's unbelievable. Maybe that's the reason they have. But they're not getting the federal monies now, if I'm correct about it. So that might reverse itself, correct?
It likely should, but if people get in the habit of paying down debt, that's what it's all about. It's about establishing proper habits so that you can live the way you want to live.
But if I could make a point about that, one of the startling statistics I actually just read on an updated report is that a good account for a number of Americans not going back to work is that a number of Americans decided to retire early.
Yeah.
Or so,
well, we
so
had
they're
that
probably
with a
living
guest
on
last
savings.
week about college professors. Exactly. And the other thing is that folks should shop around when you talk about interest rates, right? To get a lower interest rate. Go ahead.
Yes. So to get a lower interest rate, you should evaluate the debt that you have. And certainly a great partner, again, is your local credit union, or certainly if you deal with another financial institution. But credit unions typically offer loan and deposit products at a much lower cost than others. Fewer fees, certainly, and certainly that personable service there at your local credit union. And certainly, as a result, more Pennsylvania consumers are eligible to join a credit union today, because many are community banks and so serve the communities that they
We're going to run to a break.
Okay.
It's not just about adults, it's also about the children, and we'll get to that.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
All right, Mike, it's not just about adults, it's also about children and their finances. And boy, looking down the road, if they learn early, I don't have to tell you what that means, so take it.
Yeah, we talked about the importance of developing habits. And habits develop most quickly when we're youngest. So, you know, many families don't really talk about finances with their children, but they can and they should. Our credit unions are out in the communities trying to talk to children about finances. It can start as early as kindergarten.
Wow.
You can read the Berenstain Bears, The Trouble with Money. And that defines wants and needs and introduces kids to the concept of money, and it can start there and be a lifelong learning process. Right?
And one of the numbers that you point out is 94% of students aged 16 to 22 say they turn to their parents as their primary source. So we were talking about parents, right, and how important it is for them. Well, if they're going to give advice to their children, they better know what advice to give. Am I correct?
That is correct. And it is never too early to talk to your kids about their finances. When I was young, I got an allowance. And so my mother taught me I needed to save a certain amount of that allowance for future or rainy day, or if I wanted a particular toy I wanted to save up for. And then I could spend, you know, X amount of that. But families should start talking finances with their kids when they're very young, and it doesn't have to sound as complicated as talking finances. Just talk to them about the everyday things they want to buy, or they want to save for, or they want to get, and you can talk to them about finances. One of the things that credit unions do is they go out in the community, as Mike said, and talk to the They attend schools and they talk to the kids about financial literacy. There are materials out there that you can talk to your kids at any level about finances and how they could get started. And it's never too early to tell them how to balance their account, especially when they're a teenager. Yeah. And
you're actually in schools.
Oh, absolutely.
Where you get involved with, you have branches and you get involved in providing the important.
We have more than 50 in-school branches across Pennsylvania, most of which are in high schools, a couple in middle schools. And most of our credit unions will not put a branch in a school unless they can also teach curricula to go along with it. Yeah. So the branch serves as a lab, much like a science lab, to practice what they've learned in the classroom.
And so that also means that people will, remove themselves from the educational system.
Yes, and a really startling statistic, sad to say, that there are many college students that actually drop out of school, not due to doing poorly in class. It's due to finances. Either they didn't understand what school was going to cost, tuition, books, room and board, expenses, or they didn't plan appropriately, or their parents.
Yeah. Well, in Consumer Reports, 12-year-olds found that 38% did not know that credit cards were a form of borrowing, and 40% did not know that credit unions or banks charge interest. I mean, you can't make that up.
No, and the newer generation, the younger generation, unlike us, we remember you had to reach in your pocket and give them cash, and that almost hurt a little, right? When you had to do that
now, who has cash?
Right. It's very painless and very easy to do. And your debit card and your credit card aren't really that different. And so if you don't fully understand the consequences of using a debit versus a credit card, all of a sudden you run your credit card balance up and you're in over your head.
You're also funding programs in the schools. In addition to being at some of them, you're also funding them, correct?
Yes, anything related to learning, financial literacy, we're happy to fund them through our credit union foundation, through CrossState. And one of the things is that we also lend our time. So our credit unions as well often volunteer to help with those programs.
Yeah. Well, these are very, very important subjects, and I'm glad you can come in and talk about them. You have to have a written monthly and an annual budget. You have to establish a credit, an account with a credit union and a bank. You have to develop a plan to save and invest and teach your children about finances. These are the summaries. And
absolutely.
I want to thank you for coming in, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you, Terry.
Thanks for watching the program, and have a great Christmas and holiday, and we'll see you soon.